There are many organizations acting social justice work and thinking that they're going to introduce themselves, and then we'll take it.
So, just for him, if you want to write down you have access to the regenerative online. I'm not really going to be able to go through it in detail. We're just going to do it is available in the chat and the group app.
Oh, sorry, the chat. That's terrible. Okay, it sounds like audio is bad. Maybe if you move, yeah. Sorry. Okay, focus on. Okay. People online, if you want to put in the chat if the audio is better. Closer. Okay, you can go ahead and I will. Okay.
This is just kind of a whole what we've learned in the last 8 years, transforming our farm into small scale. So we are always trying to learn more people. So I'm looking at operator, writer, I'm
From that, I'm here to supplement there. It should be present primarily. I'm here to jump in later on too.
Matt does a lot of, he's done a lot of research, so he does a lot of the, figuring out where things are. The word is first course, I hope that it's not familiar with. This definition for the Natural Resource Defense Council rooted in indigenous wisdom, regenerative farming is an alternative decision-making framework that offers basic principles and practices to grow food and harmony with nature and heal the land from degradation. It looks like healthy, vital, peaceful vitality in the soil, plants and animals. It looks like a vibrant ecosystem that adapts to weather patterns. It means migrating pollinator populations and a system that is important for you guys. It means working with nature instead of against it. You are rewarded for doing so. Through and a healthy property. So that's just some things that we have created in the last few years. So, what are we doing with this?
Sorry.
These are just like we got target soil, continuity active, roots, diversity, no till or no dig. So first we're not soil. If you look around, nature will harm the soil. So therefore you're kind of doing the same thing. Target soil, vegetation, and shelter from moisture better, it and provide an ecosystem of trees and insects. So we'll talk about continual living cycles. Grazing plants are key to the healthy ecosystem. It's the western environment, oxygen. They're also hugely important for increase preventing erosion. All of this system does not mean under the ground. That's the most vital role of the root system is the life that the water will soil to be done. While perennials are important for their ability to help with ecosystems, they also help with the harvest. They also help with the soil and the organisms within it. And even as we hear about regenerative beds, even when we harvest them or deviate those plants, the roots are in the ground. Diversity is key. In monoculture, this is one species of plant. One out of one diversity of polyculture is balance of plants, helping sustain. Pests and diseases are critical to those of and do like other species start to come and take those places.
Sorry.
And this goes both for agriculture and for perennial systems such as trees, bushes, as well as perennial plants like when we're talking about no-dig, we're really talking about growing annual crops. We're not talking about doing holes in those trees. So the reason we don't do digging or sowing in the regenerative system is a lot of problems. Just which is why it's the complex and why it's very cost per use. Very unstable. It doesn't mean it's water surface level. It just means that you're so for example, last work to bring air help break down our material below. And we do some surface fracturing together. This method also relies very heavily on mulching and mineral digging. So we're adding organic matter such as compost or leaves or grass. So no food system, regenerative system function without even more animals. That does not mean, however, that you can cheat animals or livestock. It simply means you need to consider what kind of animals you want to in your system and help create habitat or place water for those animals. So whether it's sheep and cows that are mowing your grass and staying in their manure, or you want to bring in wild birds and squirrels to play in trees, There's a place for it. So now we go regenerative agriculture. Let's take a look at how we're going to use the data. Again, implement accesses and attack. So, probably the most important first step before you let go is to get to know your property first. So that has several very specific questions designed to help get the most. So, these are soil type, available space, terrain, and sun exposure. There are several ways in the questionnaire, and then also listed out in the resource guide. You can help us help find some of this information, including finding top of ground photos. This is our soil survey listed in this site. And it helps you the overall view of where your property is listed in that property map as well.
Am I pausing to see if the audio, okay, isn't working. We're having some audio difficulty. Folks on Zoom are saying that they can't hear super well. But I'm not sure. What is that?
That side is. Yeah, that's probably good. That's why. Microphone.
And let there be sound, perhaps.
Hello, hello. Is that working?
We have someone online.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Can you hear us
Oh.
better now?
Much better.
Okay.
Yay.
Thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can go to the next slide.
Thank you so much.
See if it works. Should have a video. All right, so observation is key, and it's really easy to kind of skip this step and want to jump right to the planning stage, but it's really important to familiarize yourself with your property. So there are a lot of things you're going to miss if you don't get out there and get into the soil and see what's around you. So for example, when we purchased our land, it was completely regrowth forest. Yeah, this is what it looked like when we purchased it 8 years ago. It was mostly clear cut for timber, probably back during the sheep craze in the early 1800s. So we were really lucky to have a choice between two properties. And when we walked around, one of the things that told me this property was right for us was the presence of wild blueberries. So we knew that it was going to have a good ecosystem, and it also didn't have a lot of invasives on it. So we knew that it would be a good place to start and hopefully build on that system. But if we hadn't gotten out there and really looked, we wouldn't have known that. So regardless of if you're looking for a property or you already have it, you need to get the observations in, and even just digging in the dirt is going to tell you a lot. So this is our polyculture tree row and our silvopasture in between. This was forest. So anywhere we cut forest, we ground down the stumps just to the ground and let our chickens run over it and build their own pasture. We weren't going to bother trying to dig in or till or anything beforehand, because we actually several times almost renamed our farm Rocks and Roots Farm, because we're really good at growing those two things. Anytime you put a shovel in the ground, that's what's there. So instead of fighting that, we're just allowing the chickens to run over it and build their own pasture. And they have done a beautiful job of doing that. So it really helped us form our plan for what we knew we were going to do for each area. So I'm not on there anymore. All right. The next thing is observing the wildlife. It's really important to continue to do this both when you're starting your plan and when you throughout the process. I'm constantly checking to make sure. The reason this is important, it's going to tell you a lot about the ecosystems that are already taking place on your property. It's also going to tell you if you're doing a good job. So for example, we have all these things on our property and much, much more. When we first moved in, we have a resident fox. Her name is Boots. And we see her every year. We continue to see her, probably her ancestors. But that tells us that we're not destroying the farm for her. We're not destroying the land for her. We're still allowing her to have habitat on the property. So it's really great also to give yourself that marker of how you've built it. We have watched our native pollinator population just explode. Tons of songbirds, all these different species of animals that didn't really have a home in a very like clean forest now have lots of habitat. Invasives. There was a really great workshop about this. I've actually said I didn't get to it. There is a section in the guide about invasives, and it is really important to know what you're dealing with. I have a link for NRCS's site in the questionnaire. They give you a list of all the invasives, particularly like in Massachusetts. You need to look for your state if you're not in Mass. It's good to know about these things because you need to know how to manage them. Sometimes you can have grants for bittersweet removal and things like that. Here we have Japanese beetles and they are eating a native weed. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, that was the fun part. So now we get into what do you want to get out of your plan? What do you want from this system? This is where you kind of dream big. And I'm just gonna say, when you're doing this, again, you're always going to come back to looking at it through a regenerative lens. And then you'll be able to stay on track with it. All right. Who are you trying to feed and what are you going to feed them? That is an important question to ask yourself. All right, this is a little wordy, so I'm sorry. So we know the first goal is always to feed the soil and to feed the wildlife. There is a Scandinavian practice called hensing, which is to take into account your future actions. So that is a very common practice in multiple cultures that respect nature. And it's something you need to think about when you're asking yourself who you're feeding and what you're going to feed them. It means things like leaving an extra 20 to 30% behind for wildlife, for regrowth, and even to just break down and continue to build the soil. It also means planting things that are just fodder for wildlife. Things like crab apples and lots of plants for pollinators. You need to incorporate those things into your plan, which is why it's very important to think about what's already on the property. And again, what wildlife you're trying to bring in. Beyond that, you need to ask yourself what you're going to eat. If you're trying to go fully regenerative, that means you're going to be eating perennial plants, and that may be a massive shift in your diet. So you need to ask if that's something you want to do. It doesn't mean that you can't have annual crops. It just means you need to be thinking about where the best place is for those things. I like to say a good sort of rule of thumb is to aim for perennials wherever you can, and then maybe leave the spaces that have the best sun exposure or that are already cleared or flattened. And that's where you can do your annual growing. You also need to think about caloric value. If you're talking about trying to feed your family and your community on a small space, animal products are going to be high on that list. There are also things to consider, like lettuce is great, but it's not going to feed you for very long. Squash is going to feed you for much longer and it will keep through the winter. But that doesn't mean that you can't have those things in conjunction together. Lettuce loves shade from a squash plant. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. This is the Three Sisters planting method. You're also talking about maximizing space here. You have a lot of food growing in a very small space. You have corn growing up, beans cover the corn, and squash provides ground cover. So those are really good things to consider. The other thing, and this happens more than you would think, if you're not going to eat it, or the wildlife isn't going to eat it, don't plant it. If you're not going to eat kale, don't grow kale because that's not going to help you when you're talking about a small scale system. What do you want to keep? So if you already have an existing garden that you really love and it's a flower garden, that's great, keep it. If you have a pool, or this is our maple arch where we do our maple sap boiling, we're going to keep this. So that meant when we put our tree rows in, they had to sort of move around the building. We just sort of left it there, but you need to consider what's already in your plan that you want to keep. All right, now what do you want to add, which is way more fun? So for example, we really want to add in some key ponds. This is not mine. It will help with water retention, help irrigate our market garden, be a wildlife habitat. Last year during the drought, squirrels ate every unripe apple, pear, tomato, everything off of our plants because they were looking for water. So if we can provide them with water, well, that helps them and it helps us. So it's good to sort of dream of those things. We also, one of our goals to add is an outdoor barn for animals that we're hoping to keep.
This is a good question.
Yeah.
How did you know that?
Huh?
How did you know that the squirrels were in the water?
Because we watched them do it. They were.
I mean, you put water, then they drank water, and then they stopped eating the vegetables?
No, like I watched them taking stuff off the trees and you could tell like they were like, they just needed water. Like, and they would never normally go for tomatoes. They were eating unripe tomatoes because they needed something with moisture in it. So you can't blame them if they're thirsty. All right. So as we mentioned before, animals and insects are a necessary function for a regenerative system. Obviously, which animals you plan to integrate in your system depend a lot on your lifestyle, how much time you have, your abilities and your goals. If you're looking to get the most calories out of your food system, again, animals are going to be high up on that list, but that doesn't mean that you can't have some domesticated animals in your regenerative system that are just there to kind of support the system. We'll talk about my goose in a little bit. Here she is. There's Greta. So again, this is kind of wordy. So when I am looking at an animal's role in a regenerative system, and I'm just talking about domesticated animals, I'm not talking about wildlife. I like to think of them in these three broad categories. We have the land reformers or the land movers. So like if you have a cliff and you want to take that cliff down, you want pigs in there. You want them in there rooting stuff up, digging it around. Chickens, right now we have our chickens in area of woodland that we're clearing for more pasture, and they are eating the poison ivy and scratching up the ground, and they're building that pasture. They're pooping all over the ground. They have those claws and they will dig holes. So they are really good at reshaping the land. Then we have our pasture builders, I like to call. And a lot of this depends on how heavily you graze them. And these are our bovides. I think I'm saying that correctly. Hooves are key with this one. So you're talking cows, sheep, goats. So this is sort of mimicking what, think about buffaloes grazing on a prairie would do. They're going to come in, they're going to eat the grass, mowing it down. They're going to trample in the high growth. They're going to be pooping on the ground, and they're going to be using their hooves to stamp in any extra seeds that are left over from that tall growth and all of those nutrients into the ground. And then they are going to move on and they'll have regenerated that land. So they are very good at building pasture. The last group is kind of like the land maintenance group. And these would be like your webbed-footed friends. They, because they can't really scratch the ground, they're very gentle on the ground. Actually, there's a couple orchards or wineries that use geese for their orchard management. They're really gentle on the plants, they're gentle on the ground, they're great at eating pests, and they're really good at mowing grass. Like my goose's diet is 80% grass. They need more grass than like a chicken does. Chicken doesn't really need grass. They're forest creatures. So this is Greta, my goose. She's also our guard goose for our flock of layers. So she protects the flock from aerial predators. I think everybody should have a goose, even just as a pet, but that's just, again, I'm a little biased. So the key to keeping domesticated animals in a regenerative system is rotational grazing. It can be done several ways and with several different systems, but usually it's utilizing solar fencing to help keep wildlife at bay and to help keep the animals in. This is just a quick video I have of some of our meat birds on the silvopasture, and it gives you a really great idea of kind of how this works in this system. And there's also some in the resource guide of other videos of multi-flock grazing and other animals in this system. We don't have to watch the whole thing. So this is, again, these are our meat birds out on their silvopasture that they have built. This was last fall. And the sound isn't working, sorry. I am a farmer, I am not a tech person, so I was really excited that I even got a video in. You can see where they were, and you can see where they are going. And all of that grass had been planted, they planted the year before. So it's like, it's really incredible to see what they're able to accomplish. And then if I show you, that's where they were 2 weeks before. So we went behind them with some clover and we're able to build that pasture on just on top of forest soil. We're talking, again, leaving the rocks, leaving the roots, just letting them go in, poop all over the ground, scratch it up, and then just planting a little bit of seed in it. Yeah.
What do you have to keep them in place? Is your electric fence like charged?
It's a solar panel. I have a in the resource guide and documents, which I can email to you as well. We use Premier One poultry netting. It's very, very common and it's very easy to move. They have it in different heights as well. We found, because these are our meat birds, Greta protects the layers from aerial predators, from hawks. I've watched her do it. It's incredible. We run the fencing very tight around that chicken tractor, and like they don't need a place to roost. So their tractor is literally just kind of like a covered wooden structure that Matt built. And we run it really tight. And so owls and hawks and things like that don't have enough space to get up and under the tractor because it's so low. And it's worked great. I mean, again, we have bears and foxes and all kinds of stuff, and we had no problems last year. So it works out.
There's a question online,
yeah.
how big the flock is.
What did we have last year? 60?
Yeah, we'll run 60 meat birds per cycle. And last
Yeah.
year ran 3 flocks of that, or 3 groups of them. So
Yeah.
this year we're doing a little less, but it dependent. Yeah, for the 50-foot fence and 60 birds underneath that is adequate for your
How big
density.
was the tractor? Oh, here, you need to talk into the microphone. We're breaking the rule.
I'm gonna have to guess on that. I think it's like, yeah, it was like 7 by 10, I believe, is that cover, and that's just for shade and shelter. And then they'll mill about during the day, but then they go back under that at night.
Yeah.
Did you say you just do meat chickens in the rotational grazing, or you also do egg chickens?
We do egg chickens as well. I'll show you in another slide. We have we have different pastures. So we just run the meat chickens in the silvopasture. So we have it set up. We know we move them every single day. And I cannot remember how big the actual space is that we're running them on, but we move them every day and we make it so that they never come back to the same place. It's got to be, is it 60 days?
That's what we shoot for. I mean, we were running last year. I was waiting for some other pasture to be kind of get the grass up and running there. So I had to run them a little tighter, but I think when you read up on it, 30 days is the minimum for rest on that land. And like this year, we haven't ran a batch of meat birds. So I'm just letting that grass grow up tall. I went down there and sided some of that, used that for mulch, different spots where I want to mulch in some of the tree rows. So it's, using hay as nutrition for some of my tree rows, also to suppress weeds, and just letting that grow up for a little while before I put the chickens on it, which the chickens will go on it this coming month right now for a batch.
So you don't have to use a weed whacker to go in there and cut brush and stuff before you
No.
put the fence?
I mean, he does scythe it. It does work better if it's got like closer ground clearance, but the way our tree rows are set up, there's trees and berries on either side where the grass isn't growing right up against it. And it's like, we run it pretty tight within that row. So it gets pretty good ground clearance.
But you're correct. If you went in there to a full hay field and it was sticking up everywhere, you're gonna ground out your electric netting. So I'll usually just kind of mow ahead of that, but I go in there, those tree rows are narrow. I scythe in there. Or just by hand with a scythe and cut it that way.
I fixed the audio for the video. If you
Oh,
want
but
to
no,
play
that's
it.
all right. It's fine. It was just kind of the visual.
Yeah.
So, all right. So now that we've talked about the basics of the guide and the basics of regenerative agriculture, we're going to talk about how you're going to put that together to create your plan. So one of the first things you need to consider when you're making your plan is input and time. The beauty of a regenerative system is that really once it's established, it's fairly self-sufficient. However, initial input can kind of be a lot. You may need larger equipment, especially when you're talking about larger structural changes. For example, like we're mostly forest, that takes a lot of effort to clear that. If it's already cleared, obviously you're looking more at putting systems in as opposed to changing a lot. You also need to consider things like how much actual time you have to commit to the system. I had a point and I don't remember what it was. That's okay. We'll keep going. So the way we found the best way to create our plan, and again, we did not have this plan when we started our farm. And if we had, it would have made things a lot better. It would have saved us from sort of undoing things we already did. So the best way to do this is to create zones. This is, there we go. I'm going to go to the next slide. So this was actually done for us. The next slide. This is from our NRCS agent who came out to our house, Natural Resource and Conservation. And it gives you a good idea of how they classify things. So hers is a lot neater than mine. It's great if you can start with an aerial photo. Again, the photo from before, I literally bartered eggs with somebody to get them to come out with their drone. But you can get, she pulled this from, I think, Google Earth. So it's great if you can start with this big picture. And that's kind of what I'm going to show you next. So you're going to start big. This is our full farm, our basic general areas. We have managed forest, tree orchard, we have pastures, our market garden. All these things are broken into zones. What's going on in each area? Compost zone, forest. You're looking at things like, again, your sun exposure, what's already growing there, things like that. Then you're going to take it in a little bit so you can work on one zone at a time. So this is where the majority of our food production happens. This is less than 3/4 of an acre. We have our market garden, we have a tea garden, lots of pollinator area. We have our silvo pasture and our tree rows, which we can show you. I have a more zoomed in view a little bit later on. But the majority of our food is grown in this space because we didn't want to clear cut forests and put in a more traditional farm. So our meat birds are running on that silvo pasture. And again, I feed 10 other families with our CSA off of this space. Then you can work on the details. So I'm going to say this because if you're anything like me, I'm a details person. I like the little tiny nitty gritty, like detail things. If you try to start small and then zoom out, you are going to frustrate yourself. It's better to start big, organize it into zones, and then go one at a time. It's a lot easier to see how something works in a system, especially a regenerative system, if you're looking at it on a bigger scale. My suggestion to you, if you are like me and you're like, oh, I want to remember that, an oregano flower is a great pollinator plant. Keep a notebook, keep lists, and then you can kind of organize it within the system. So you can remember, oh, that's right, I've got this little tidbit about this really great plant that I want to grow here. I will put it in this zone, but start big and then come down a little bit. All right.
Did you say how large is your property in total?
So our property in total, we have 7.5 acres. About how much that doesn't have structure on it? Six-ish, six.
1,800 square foot home, mine's that.
Yeah.
So we use our lawn as some of our grazing area for the chickens. It's just the disturbance level. I move them quicker on that.
Yep.
Because I don't want them completely
Digging
degrading
holes and-
that, but that picture Lindsay had up, I was standing there with a pitchfork. What I was doing was actually we're running the chickens in the spring, letting them scuff up all the dead grass, and I was following along and reseeding. So I was like doing like I'm, using them to do some work for me. Coming along, I'd kind of just aerate the lawn with the pitchfork instead of a broad fork. I didn't want to disturb it. It is my lawn. I'm not a grass guy, but it still has to look somewhat decent, right? So I was going along, tossing seeds behind them, some compost, and then mulching with some hay, and it was the right time of year for that. So it's just an opportunity to use those chickens. And then, I won't run them on the grass like now when it's middle of summer or whatever, but they have their time. Those are the layers. And then the meat birds we use elsewhere. But like Lindsay said, just opportunities to put them there and put them to work. I don't want to sidetrack the presentation. Our hope is that it'll turn more into a forum at the end here.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of supplemental slides that get into more like nitty gritty things. I was kind of trying to guess what questions might be. So I do have a lot on, growing annuals, if you have questions about that, or
Chickens, tons about the chickens.
tons about chickens, tree rows, anything you might have questions about. I have some suggestions for perennial vegetable plants, things like that. So really it is open forum now. Any particular questions you have, we're here for, or we can get into detail.
It's like a food forest type of thing, like the tall trees in the north, and sort of like you mentioned layers a lot.
Yep.
You do layers like trees, shrubs, annuals, that type of thing.
Are you talking about like our laying chickens or?
The way you have your whole.
Oh, the layout? Yeah.
Yeah, so
I'm
we
gonna-
played with a couple different models. So I
Sorry.
know she had a picture there, and it was like a fruit tree, his little guild, and that was just an area in our front, more of like our front yard garden.
Okay.
But the bulk of those tree rows Lindsay spoke about earlier, I mean, that's more like it's like a linear food forest, I guess they call it, rather than like a syntropic one where it's an actual forest. I mean, the main thing we're fighting in the north here is we have differences in light throughout the year, right? Even just within a month's time. So throughout the growing season, your light time is, it changes. So I think a lot of people argue that if you put your food forest more in a line, you're getting a more even exposure. So our property's a north slope, and then I run the trees on contour for erosion control, right, mainly, but also that's giving them, an east to west orientation across my property relatively. So we're kind of like only in the oldest tree rows I've put in that system. I mean, I have apple trees that are older and more conventional orchard. We've only been on that property for 8 or 9 years now. I put some of those in earlier, but the tree rows are like 4 years old now. So
That's
exactly what
our-
you're asking, start with my tree layer, and a lot of those are more bushes. And then I'm gonna start going into shrub layer underneath, and then trying to get some more beneficial plants down below as ground cover. Because the goal is make this shift, and a lot of that, well, Lindsay talked about earlier.
You can't go that quick.
Yeah.
You have to
So
come back to the
this
microphone.
drawing was like kind of my plant for this. These are just rows, and a lot of it I have hazelnut bushes, Juneberry, which is also known as serviceberry. It has a bunch of different names. So when I was looking at, I said, okay, well, I want a uniform height across these tree rows. I don't want to have a relatively uniform. I didn't want to have small bushes get dwarfed out. So I looked at, okay, the hazelnuts, where they grow to like 12, 15 feet high. Juneberries are relatively the same. And I know I'm going to prune the trees when I do. I'm not going to prune them as heavy as a conventional orchard, but maintain everything relatively the same height. So I have a mixture, hazelnuts, Juneberries, plums, and I'm alternating as I go. Hazelnuts, then I go plum, Juneberry, hazelnut. Next row, instead of the plums, then I have apples in there and pears. So I'm mixing all those things in to minimize my exposure to that pest pressure, because I'm not going to, this is just going to be a holistic organic orchard down there. I'm not going to be spraying for anything, not really. I'm relying on the system to take those controls that need to be done. So to minimize any type of pest or disease pressure jumping from tree to tree, that's why we're alternating it. And then eventually, like you're saying, Sarah, I will go in between and put shrub layer. I'm waiting for those to grow up a little more now and provide that. So underneath, start looking at. different
We
shrubs.
also, we have wild blueberries growing on the property and they are already they've spread and are providing a lot of ground cover. So like in this exact photo, there are lots of wild blueberries growing in underneath there as well.
And
Do we
then the
have
other
a-
thing is, so
yeah,
now I created these lanes in between the tree rows, right? So I only need so much space for the chickens. So I got like 36 feet in between each tree row. Well, that looks clean now for me to run my chickens, and I ran raspberries down the middle because I said, I'm getting nothing out of these fruit trees, these nut trees for a few years. Well, raspberries, I can plant them in the spring, and by fall, if I'm using every bear, I'm getting a crop out of those, right? So I'm looking at this as what can I get while my trees grow up? And eventually I'm probably gonna have to take those raspberries out of the middle because it's gonna be a jungle down there. If I still want to continue to run chickens, I can take the raspberries out. If I just want to have it like an overgrown, the trees are gonna spread out into that pasture, but just look at what you can do in the meantime, and it doesn't have to be so permanent, right? You could, instead of running chickens in between these tree rows, we could like alley crop it with, squash or pumpkins and use that as a market garden for a few years. Trees start to grow in and encroach, well, maybe it's not gonna be as productive. We're gonna have a lot less light in there. So I think we get like really set on, hey, now it's permanence. This is just where I grow blueberries and that's all I do. Well, you gotta be okay with that's gonna change over time because we're modifying this landscape. So how can I push it? Okay, I wanna have a goal where I want to be in 10, 15 years or whatever, but how do I kind of make my way through there and get something along the way? Because like I said, those apples, those pears, those plums, I might have to wait for them. So I need something I can get out of there in the meantime.
There's also, and that is a part of it. Again, that's why it's important to continue the observation, because if you start to look at the system and go, all right, like I did it, I'm done, you need to make sure it's working. And again, it's a lot of trial and error. We say it's trial and a lot of error. We figure it out and say, okay, well, we screwed up on this part. That's fine. We'll change it. Sometimes unexpected, really good things happen. Volunteer species pop up where we didn't plant them and they do really well there. So we leave them alone because they're doing well and they're providing fodder for something. That's okay. A lot of this is like, you have to embrace the chaos a little bit. Again, this is not really the system for you if you're looking for like a manicured, nice thing. We say this year has been like the year of the wild. Everything has kind of exploded. And it's really interesting to see how it's all working, because things like leaving a patch of garden that I was going to plant mustard in, I didn't get to it. It has taken over with native weeds. It's right next to my market garden, and the Japanese beetles are going after the weeds. So the weeds can stay. That's okay. That means it's taking the pressure off of some of the other things. So you kind of have to, again, having the plan is great, but you have to be constantly observing. And again, saying, this isn't permanent. It takes a really long time to grow a hazelnut tree. We're not going to be harvesting anything for a long time. So in the meantime, berries grow very quickly. We'll be able to eat things off of that. And we're providing, again, fodder for a lot of different
And I
animals.
think we failed to mention too, this site here, as you can see from the picture, there's a pretty decent slope there, and that's why we went with that linear model. Whereas up back behind the house, where I've started clearing, and I'm gonna add some stuff up there. I think I might try more like a savanna type model, so as I thin up there, hey, leave some really nice, some of the better oak trees as specimens or whatever. What I want to do is put pigs up there. So, okay, acorns for pigs, right? Now I can think about, hey, maybe I create little islands where I got like a food forest, like you're saying. You get that oak tree, and then, hey, maybe you get some fruit and nut trees from that. Maybe mulberries, they shoot out huge crops, and kind of have little pockets because it's flatter up there. So I'm not as concerned with the erosion factor. So yeah, I think just playing around with, and that's what we're trying to do is, hey, what works best for our site, or what can we recommend to people going forward? We're just playing with it, and unfortunately the results are it's gonna take some time to see what works best. But
Yes.
I have a lot of questions, but
Yeah, that's fine.
how much of your diet would you say is supplemented by this, and also how much of your like how much labor does it take? I'm curious, yeah, how those weigh out.
Such a hard question. So just so we really just made the switch to really pushing regenerative on our property within the last 3-4 years max. Literally, the market garden did not exist. The tree rows did not exist 4 years ago. And when we started looking at that, again, we were part of our big push was the town would not recognize us as a farm because they didn't see traditional farming going on. So we said, okay, fine. Because we collect maple sap. We don't run lines, we hand carry. So they're like, well, you're not doing, I don't like see traditional farming going on. And we were not okay with just like, all right, well, just clear cut everything and just put animals on it. We did not want to do that. So we said, all right, we can do a market garden and we'll do no dig. So it kind of like started there and kind of grew from there. So last year we fed 10 other families and ourselves, and it was kind of like during the summer months, it was supplementing a good part of our diet, especially when we did meat chickens. That was a huge added bonus. This year I decided to scale back. We have 3 very small kids and I run this full time and I wrote a cookbook 2 years ago, and it was like, I need to take a break kind of. Matt also works a lot off the farm. So it really is just me, day-to-day operations. Chores, not that much. So it's kind of depends. Like, again, when you're talking about the annual gardens, you know, it's a big push in the spring from like May to June. I am kind of out straight in there every day. But what was nice about knowing that is I go, okay, well, we're not going to get meat birds until a little bit later in the season because I need to be focusing on doing those kinds of things. Again, any perennials you're talking about are pretty self-sufficient. Other than like continuing mulching, it's not that much. Once we get meat birds, last year we had 3 batches going at the same time. So we had chicks in a brooder, we had like juveniles in our winter chicken coop, and we had full grown out on pasture. And even with all that, like morning and afternoon chores for feeding and watering them, maybe 20 minutes. It's not much.
Like I will say the chores when it comes to like chickens, and I can't speak for other animals because I don't have the experience with it, but like whether you have 10 or 100, you still have to walk. I mean, it's more water, it's more feed, but you still have to walk down and do the same chore. So when you multiply the numbers, it really doesn't change that chore that much. And you know, when we do a pasture move in the morning, especially with the meat birds, it's like those things are, it's funny. The first, so we start them in the brooder, and then they go into our winter chicken coop as like an intermediate stage. And it's just an enclosed run, just basically to get them acclimated off the heat lamps, get acclimated while they're feathering out. And then they're on a deep litter system, which is another thing I want to get into talking after this. Then they go out to pasture. Like the first day, it's chaos because when you open up that fence, if you don't have it ready to go and give them something to do, they'll just scatter. Well, by like day 3, they are trained to know they train really easy. They see that bucket and they'll follow you wherever you go with that bucket, like the Pied Piper.
The other thing, and I actually have I have a highlighted stories on our Instagram account of like the meat birds, and I actually have a video of like all 3 batches kind of going at once. And one of the things that I learned, so last year we had a layer go broody, and I gave her some eggs to hatch out. And so we had a batch of chickens to, you know, extend our laying flock that was raised by a chicken. Those chickens are incredibly good at foraging. They don't look to a bowl for their food. They're looking on the ground because their mother taught them to scratch the ground and look for bugs. So they are incredibly good at it. So we kept hearing, this is our first time with meat birds, and we kept hearing like, they're so lazy. They just sit around and they don't move, put the food on one end, the water on the other. I started
leg problems. People, you know, all the things can go wrong. And some people I said, well, how do you keep, we don't move them much, but they don't move. So, but I don't know, our experience has been the opposite. By moving them every day, they have to get up and move. When I put feed in there, I kind of just dump it on the ground and around the perimeter of it. And they that way it reduces fighting. If you dump it in one spot, you get 60 birds fighting for access to it. That's a mess. So I usually just dump a little grain to occupy them. I moved the fence, I moved the tractor. It's just the shelter, that thing, the tarp you saw, it's super light, low tech, lightweight. And then I walk around the perimeter and dump the rest of the grain. We feed them twice a day so they don't gorge themselves on one point, but like, what's that, you know? The morning chores, the move is maybe like 15 minutes. And then the afternoon is just going down. If it's really hot, obviously refilling water. Cooler months, you're not refilling the water once a day is all you're doing it. And then dumping the grain out.
I will say, so what I learned from like that is I kind of started training them. Like we don't even use a feeder for the meat birds anymore. We just put it on the ground because we want them scratching the ground. And I started that behavior even in the brooder. I will put some in a feeder, but I will scatter some on the chips and I like am pecking at it with my finger and they're going, okay, the food is on the ground. Like that needs to be in their little brains. The food is on the ground.
And once one does, just like anyone who's raised chickens, once you feed, you know, show one where water is or a couple, maybe say like 1 in 15, they'll all learn.
I have a question about the perennial
Yeah.
vegetables. Where do you find those that are, that can grow well in this area?
So Johnny's is a really great source. There's also in our resource guide, pine tree seeds is another really good one. So this picture in the top right-hand corner has been like the most, like has blown my brain. That is perennial arugula. I learned about that from Charles Dowding. Sylvetta is the species that I used. It is wildly self-seeding. So the key with that is like you're planting it, you let it grow, you can see a flower right there. It produces a seed pod and then it sort of bends over and it will reseed itself. I have this growing on the end of all my beds. It's growing in the walkway and it's amazing because the more you cut it, the more it grows. So a
It's
lot of
delicious
these,
though, yeah.
it's amazing. And like my CSA members, like even the little ones are coming in and like, they know like where it is and can pick it and eat it. So it's like incredible how much food you can grow. I cannot grow cultivated arugula. It bolts on me every time. I have the worst luck with it. This stuff is amazing and it tastes super good. So it's been really interesting to see and sort of creating space for these in a lot of areas. That other one up above is in the back of our tea garden. That's asparagus. So it kind of depends. I don't necessarily have specific sources. Like our rhubarb, we got it from somebody else. It grows really, really well, and we were able to get it from somebody nearby, so we were able to split it. Yeah. So it kind of depends. Yeah.
What do you do with the sunchokes? We have them, they grow every year, and we love to do something with them. We have used the roots, but like digestive issues sometimes associated with it.
So I have these on the list. We have not grown them.
Oh,
I'm sorry. So you have?
Just like anything you do with potatoes, you can fry them, you can boil them. They're really good, especially if you know anyone that has diabetes. It's really good.
Yeah, it's low on the glycemic index. So I have heard that, like anything you do with them. I have obtained them before, but I have heard that they can be, a lot of people have digestive issues with them. So I wanted to sort of test them in our house to see before I decided to commit to them. They are also, from what I've heard, very big spreaders. So actually, is it Ben's fault? There is a man in the resource guide who does a lot of, helps with planning people's regenerative food systems. And he has them growing in along his driveway, which makes sense because you have a space that you're not necessarily using. And if you have something that's really going to spread, that's like a good spot for it. So I really try to keep, again, you need to consider with a lot of these, they're either almost borderline invasive or they're like wildly self-seeding. Even in the background, you can see I have anise hossip. I started with like a plant. It is everywhere. And I do leave it a lot of places because it is amazing pollinator food. I mean, I have one right outside my front door and there's like 100 bees on it every morning when I go outside. So it's great, but it will kind of take over. So I try to leave a lot of these things to like designated areas so that they can kind of take over, and that's okay. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any more suggestions on sunchokes.
I mean, and then kind of like when you move that land, or we were kind of talking about the tree rows, like if that patch gets out of hand and I want to reclaim it, I'll just chop and drop it. I'll take out one of my big black silage tarps, bring it over, drop it on top of that.
Or let the chickens run through
Yeah,
it.
or let the chickens, but then let
There you go.
solarize that, let all that stuff break down, so it's not gonna grow again. And then just top it with the compost and start over, so it's like just having some quick to go to methods where you're like, okay, how do I troubleshoot this problem because it's getting out of hand? Okay, I can throw the black tarp on it, or I can throw the white side up, depending on what you want to do. And just kind of like knowing, okay, because things are a little wild when I'm sure you guys experience, anybody who's doing any of these things, it gets out of hand and it doesn't look like the well manicured garden that you kind of had in mind maybe initially.
I'm gonna put this up. I've got a bunch of extra slides and I can always, I can email. If anybody has questions beyond this, if you think about afterwards, if you look at the guide and you're like, I have a really specific question about this one thing or how this works. This is like just some good suggestions, especially if you're in New England, for things that you can consider if you're talking about a tree row system.
I think like Lindsey touched on it early, when you start observing what's on your property, and I had, several versions of wild blueberries in there, huckleberries, we had wild aronias. So kind of when I have some weird spot that I don't know what to do with, well, like aronias have been my go-to for just some, hey, I want to put some hedges here, occupy the space, turn it to something else. And aronias are pretty astringent, but when you add a little sugar and you make a pretty damn good aronia old fashioned.
Highly recommend.
But we found other ways to use them, but like, yeah, you're just gonna work with it, I guess.
It's the #1 ice cream flavor in Poland. So clearly they know something that we don't.
That's what we're told, yeah.
It literally, like, once you add, and it's really interesting because I have the picture up earlier. So I went and collected berries the other day. I am looking at, so again, we knew we had blueberries growing. Since bringing in some domesticated blueberries and bringing in aronias, we must have like 20, we have at least 6 varieties of wild blueberries that I can count, and you can see the difference. They're all just different. So they're all sort of helping each other. We also, again, we have a lot of native pollinators, one of which is a blue orchard mason bee. We added to it, we put in a bee house. Our blueberries are covered in the early spring with hundreds and hundreds of mason bees. They're super shy. They're antisocial. Every female is a queen, which I love. They don't sting, and they literally live in this short period of time. And they're called blue orchard mason bees for that reason, because they're only alive during when fruit trees and berries and stuff are flowering. And they don't travel like a honeybee can travel a really long time. A honeybee is not native. It's from Europe. So those bees, those are our bees, our little special blue orchard mason bees. They come in, they just pollinate every single flower. And in doing so, they've obviously created these interesting mixes of things. We have several varieties of raspberries, and those are starting to mix with even wild blackberries. They say if you have wild brambles growing on your property, which we did, so we knew that they would grow well. Again, we're really good at growing soft fruits. And we've added things like currants. We have rows of currants around each section of our market garden, both as a windbreak and again, just provide more food and pollinators.
Which the red currants aren't they good? I always like black currants, but you're really not supposed to have them in mass, white pine blister. I mean, you can get a permit for them or whatever, but I have a lot of nice white pines on a portion of my property. I didn't want to have anything introduced, but pink champagne currant, delicious. If you see that variety, they do really well. They're doing well on our property, and it's delicious.
I forgot to put them on this list. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see, because even the wild blackberries, they say you're supposed to remove them because they can bring in diseases for your to any cultivated variety you bring in. I have not had that happen. And if it has, we sort of do the stun method, where it's you put it in and we get our trees, bare root, we put them in, we water them for the first week or two. And then after that, they're on their own and they're doing great. I mean, part of that is probably on the tree rows or on the contour. So again, that's on a steep area of our property where we needed to slow the runoff of water anyway. So by making that contour, the contour lines and planting the tree rows there, that allows for the plants that are there to hold the soil. And it allows for that water to really kind of like trickle down. And we didn't cut key lines. Some people do that where you're cutting strategic lines.
Or
For your
swales
rows.
or anything. No, we just using the tree rows and their root systems will help do that and help infiltrate water. We have really like sandy soil too, so water staying on the surface isn't really an issue for us. But what Lindsey was saying about stuns, that's Mark Shepard, if you ever heard of him or read any of the stuff, where strategic total utter neglect. And we adhere to that. We're basically, hey, if it doesn't survive, we're gonna give it a little help in the beginning. If it doesn't survive, then I'm not interested in. Like, I'm not interested in going and carrying a couple 100 yards down from my house to go fertilize some tree, like,
Oh.
or like go take care of it.
All right, I love it. So do you know if there are any regenerative farm ecologist education activity advocates for the state to support regenerative ag, food systems and agroforestry on a large scale? I don't know. There are some great, there's a couple design groups that will help with creating plans like this. Again, we also have another.
Yeah, regenerative design group, I believe, at a Greenfield has some really, like just the models they do. I want someone to do that for me, so if anyone's listening.
There's that. There's also, I mean, we have found NRCS to be a really great resource in finding out a lot about pollinators. Again, we have an NRCS agent that is assigned to our farm. But that doesn't mean that even if you don't have a farm or even a backyard, sometimes just going to the NRCS office, they have awesome resources, again, because their goal is to conserve natural resources. So they're a really great source for things like that. But I don't know about that.
I'll add, American Farmland Trust is working with NRCS on a Western New England regenerative livestock project.
Oh.
It's Worcester County and then kind of some counties west of there and north into Vermont, and other states, Connecticut, I believe too. So
it's
added incentives.
It's NRCS and who? And American Farmland Trust?
And conservation districts. It's a RCPP, regional conservation partnership program.
Okay, that's awesome. I love it.
Do you know where you found hazelnut bushes to start with?
So the hazelnuts, I bought them from a couple different sources. As far as any trees, I mean, Fedco in Maine is my go-to. They have some of the best, the hardiest ones that I've ever gotten.
Really?
I mean, you look on there, like I think a hazelnut bush there might be like $18. I bought them other places like Fox River Valley Nursery. I bought a bunch from them.
I have a whole bunch from Arbor Day, Arbor Tree.
Okay.
They're in the Midwest somewhere.
I try to buy from in New England. This is
Well,
my.
I just bought some because I wanted to support them.
Yep.
And they are just like, I'm in town, I'm on 0.2 acres, right? But I have these huge hazelnut bushes.
Oh, really?
Hazelnut, what was the name of the
It's Arbor Tree.
Arbor Tree? And you said it's in the Midwest somewhere?
Yeah, it's actually like an organization that just promotes, trees.
Like Arbor Day Foundation, yeah.
One plug I will say for that Fox River Valley Nursery. I'd ordered stuff from them in the past. It was all good stuff. Last year I ordered some more hazelnuts to go in some of these rows, and they're supposed to be like 2 feet tall whips when they come. And they emailed me and said, hey, we're out of them. Do you want your money back, or do you want to wait till next year? We'll send you larger trees. Well, I don't know how that works if they're out of them, but then we're going to send me, like, it should be the same number, right? Anyway, they sent me ones this year and they were like this tall. So they're doing really well. I think on there you get them for like $7 a piece. They're super cheap. Z's Nutty Ridge was another spot for it, and they're in New York, it's upstate New York.
A lot of these are in the resource guide, and I did update this. I put it in the documents on the Hoover app, but again, I can email anybody if you want it. But yeah, that's the only thing about Fedco is like you need to order super early in the year.
They shut down ordering.
They're done after
by like February or something. Sometimes they'll have a surplus sale that will come back online, but I got nothing but great things to say about their products. Their stuff is great. I've never lost anything from them
Yeah.
buying Bear Root.
They also have some great programs with heirloom seeds and indigenous seeds, where they give back portions to the tribe that they're getting the seeds from, which I love. So they've got, like, I got potatoes last year. I don't remember what tribe they were from, but it was an indigenous seed, and so they get a portion back. So I love things like that. They're a really great resource. Their website can be a little chaotic because there's like Fedco trees and then Fedco seeds and then Fedco potatoes. So they're like all different sites.
Yeah, but anybody who's got their paper like brochure, you get a few laughs. Like there's little anecdotes and funny little stories and whatever.
They do nice sketches and stuff. So it's all the game of, again, trying to figure out the plan and like laying it out. Because it's easy to get, like, you get the seed catalogs and the tree catalogs and you're like, I want all the things. And then,
There's a question about what resources you recommend to learn what layers grow well together. For example, what to grow under an apple or pear tree next to raspberries.
Oh, like a fruit guilds?
Yeah.
All right, I have a slide for that. So this is not, this is from, it's right on the bottom. This is from the Resiliency Institute. And again, this is just kind of these are all things that are good growing together. There's also a lot of our resources and a lot of our knowledge is from YouTube. Like, we have a YouTube channel just to kind of pay back like what we've learned. I haven't put a video on there for a while, so. But we do try to, anytime we find something that we're like, oh, we don't really see a video for this, let's make a video. We make a video to try to be like, if somebody's gonna look this up, like, let's give them something to look at.
Yeah, I think the most views we have are like
the rock splitting video.
Yeah, I couldn't find information on it. I want to split some boulder. So I was like, finally figured it out. I did it, and there's not a million views. So there's a lot more views than any farm and stuff. Which is, hey, this is supposed to be about the farm and plants and planting things.
So the resource guide, to answer that question too, the resource guide has a lot of websites. There are some books, a lot of YouTube channels for regenerative agriculture, and they're all kind of a little different and on different scales. So like we have Tapa North Farm, which is in Northern Ireland, Scotland. And they are very small scale, and they're in a north climate.
Whatever. So it's very
so
same scale.
Yeah, same scale. And then we have like Hugh Richards, who really focuses on even smaller scale than that, and growing a lot in a small place. And then you've got like Richard Perkins, who literally wrote the book on regenerative agriculture, but his farm is massive. So there's lots of different resources and lots of books and things like that. But specifically talking about like tree rows and tree guilds, again, that list that I put up is kind of a good idea. But again, you're kind of looking at like what grows at what story. You want to kind of fill in the mid-level, and then you want a ground cover, and you want things that are going to support each other. So like alliums, so anything like a chive, an onion, even growing bulbs like a daffodil, helps the soil around like an apple tree in particular. So they're really good to plant near trees. So I actually grew a bunch of chives this year, and I'm going to be putting them in the tree rows. I also am a huge fan of alpine strawberries. I feel like people don't respect them enough, but I will be eating strawberries in November. They're little tiny strawberries. They don't grow by rhizomes, so they don't spread under the ground. They stay really small. And I was able to grow some from seed. The Alexandria, I think, is the variety I have from Johnny's Seeds. And I produced tons of plants off of it. And again, they're like little short shrubby bushes. You can put them in along the bottom, and they'll just keep pumping out berries all the time. They're like, again, they're very tiny, but they're good fodder for animals and for people, and they're covering the ground.
Other things, like if you don't know what to do in an area, where you're like, hey, I don't know what to do with this, the weeds are starting to get out of control. Like buckwheat's super easy to throw around because it's a heavy seed. It's a big seed. It's not, anyone's eating buckwheat knows. So you can go out and just kind of broadcast those seeds in an area, and then chop it down with a weed whacker or a scythe. Now that's mulched right, and now it's kind of get some moisture retention. That stuff will pop up pretty quick. The bees love it.
Mhm.
And that's what I did with the pasture when I was having the chickens. I went down and like I attempted to seed last year early and we got really dry and I don't know, I probably like 10% of my pasture seed had sprouted. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm supposed to put chickens on this." I went down there, we had a little rainy stretch, same thing, just threw buckwheat out and I mulched with some grass from another area on our farm. And that shot up and then the chickens went through and it was time, they just trampled, the meat birds just trampled it over and of course, they're pooping on that and turning that into just more compost. And then after they were done, then I was able to seed behind them. And that was kind of the transition we did there. But like, if you don't occupy that space with something, right, then the weeds are going to come. So that's the buckwheat just out competes or cowpeas or something that's going to grow. Like I have an area, I threw a bunch of cowpeas this summer. It's really sandy, ratty soil up there. And I'm like, I'm not going to really irrigate that area. So I threw a bunch of cowpeas and they're coming up really good. So just playing with those things like that. And like I said, I like those seeds because you can just easily tactilely throw them out there. Yes.
Do you produce enough compost for your operation? Can you talk more about?
So we're trying to close that loop.
We're trying to close the loop on that.
And one way we're doing that is so the meat birds are in freezer camp come the end of the fall, right? But the layers, they're out on pasture all summer. And then I built this coop for them with a long run. And when I built it, I built like a fieldstone, a wet foundation that's deep. So then we throw them in there and that's deep litter method for the winter. So all winter they are on deep litter with just wood chips. And then we go in and we just like every couple of days or once a week, go throw wood chips on top. And of course they're stirring it around. And that creates a lot of cubic feet of compost for us. So now between that, the garden waste, all this stuff mixing, we're starting to get to where we're almost having enough. Anyone who's done no dig knows it takes a lot just to do that. So we're still buying some. We found a couple good sources out by us.
I will say we could be producing, we probably could be. We need a better system for ours because we don't turn it enough. So it's not like we're not getting the turnover. It's not breaking down as quickly as it really should be because we've got all that, good biomass in there. We've got all all that chicken poop, which is just incredible, especially with the wood chips.
My dogs are my biggest problem. If I could leave it open in the front, I'd just go in my tractor. I have an actual tractor. I'd drive and flip with the bucket. But the dogs get in there, they start digging through the compost. Next thing you know, they're getting sick. So I have to have it enclosed, which means it turns into like, it's manual labor. So I'm out there with the old, trying to do the 3-bin method with a pitchfork. And it's like on a day like today, you're like, I'm not turning compost.
Yeah.
So then it turns into, I haven't turned it in 3 weeks. So it's like not really good aerated or, it's gone anaerobic on you. So.
Did you have a question?
Yes, what's your go-to mulch? Is it straw? Is it leaves?
So I've actually been doing some experiments with that. Originally it was compost in the no-dig beds. We were compost and wood chips. I mean, again, we have a lot of timber products and we have a sawmill, so we're able to produce a lot of our own wood chips. It's already there. Like we have a closed loop on that at least. But I have been recently trying to do a bit more, especially as Matt has gotten to scything. So we're leaving areas of our pasture because even with running, so our lawn is essentially our layer pasture. So we're running them around, and honestly, they don't need all of what we have we have like 20 layers.
They mow it pretty good. If you run on your lawn, you hardly gotta mow your lawn.
Yeah, we don't mow it, but we do leave
Like 3-day
areas.
rotation.
We do leave areas like open so that we have some hay. And I've been trying to utilize that and do more of like a root stout method in certain areas. So like my tomato area this year, I'm mulching it with hay to see if it does better. There's also, I always forget his name. He's in Maine. Jim Kovaleski. He has a YouTube channel. He does like grass-fed gardening is all he does.
He doesn't have a YouTube. He's featured on.
Oh, that's right. He does not have his own YouTube, but he does like all grass-fed gardening. So I'm kind of experimenting. So usually it's compost, but I'm trying to do a little bit more with hay, again, in different areas and for different things. I just use different kinds of mulching. I have also, it can be a little high acidity because again, it's a forest product, but like oak leaves sometimes will even, because they mat and they really, it takes them a long time to break down. So in one of our separate beds that we have, for a while, we were using oak leaves in there as well, and that worked out pretty good.
I mean, the most user-friendly, easiest, cleanest one is just to go compost, right? We all, easy to work in, you can direct seed into it. I mean, you can get messier stuff if you're gonna do more transplants. I mean, then you can just go in and pull that grass aside or whatever, and just put your plug into there. But it really depends on what you're doing with that area. Like I say, if you're doing transplants, it opens up how messy you can get with leaves and all kinds of crazy stuff.
We're unfortunately over time.
I was gonna
as
say,
well.
we're out of
Yes,
time.
I don't know if you have a closing slide. Or
I don't have a
anything.
closing
Okay,
slide, but
good.
again, if you guys have any questions, I know we kind of ran through all kinds of stuff. Please feel free to email me. You can check out our YouTube channel. Again, I don't have a ton on there. Instagram, I have a bunch of videos as well, so. And thank you. Yeah, it's in the Hoover app. I uploaded in documents, it's in like handouts. But again, there's a notebook that if you want to put your email address in it, I can just email you what I have as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for coming.